Hello and welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast, the #1 poetry spoken word podcast in the world. I'm claiming it into existence. All right, and today we have a very, very, very special guest. Our next guest is a spoken word poet, journalist, and organizer from San Jose, California. She is Santa Clara County's first 2021 Inaugural Youth Poet Laureate, a 2020 National Student Poet Program semifinalist, and a U.S. delegate to the International Congress of Youth Voices, a firm believer that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. She is always actively looking for inventive ways to tackle current events in her poetry. Just to name a few, her poetry has been featured by Stanford University, Planned Parenthood, and the Kronos Quartet. Her journalism pieces have been published in Refinery 29, the LA Review of Books, and the Education Post, among many others. Please welcome to the Poet Speaks podcast, Anouk Yeh. Anouk, how are you?
I'm doing so great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you're a Cali native, like we were talking about a little earlier. I'm a Sacramento born, bred, raised. You're San Jose, SJ. Tell us a little bit about San Jose growing up there.
Yeah, so I grew up in kind of the San Jose South Bay area, and I actually am currently in Saratoga. But yeah, growing up in kind of the San Jose area has been incredibly amazing. I mean, I've lived here my entire life, but I think especially in terms of like poetry and like spoken word performance poetry, especially San Jose is this like very vibrant community of like slam poets, and especially slam poets, I think that are very intentional about using their poetry and using their work to, comment on and like push forward different like social movements. So I think I definitely got like inspired to do like spoken word and like I think and use activism and use spoken word to kind of like melt together with activism. That definitely stemmed from like growing up in the South Bay. Yeah.
Absolutely. One thing I remember growing up in California, Northern California, especially, I think that's one thing a lot of people don't realize. A lot of the kids out there, you're kind of, I would almost say you're groomed into that kind of culture of activism, revolution, really speaking for your rights. Obviously the history of that area, you have Black Panthers in Oakland, you have a lot of those things going on. So it's definitely stemmed from the education system. I remember reading things like Their Eyes Were Watching God, Color Purple, very
I'm reading
much
that right now. Yeah.
Yeah, very much intersectional pieces that were teaching you so much about race issues, sex issues, gender issues. So for sure, I can relate to that. That area is so like special in terms of like activism and really infusing that into your artwork. So tell us a little bit about your experience so far with the spoken word scene out there. Is it an open mic type of area, places in San Jose where people go to open mics a lot? Poetry slams you mentioned, but also like poetry clubs. What does it look like for the poetry spoken word scene out in San Jose?
Right. Yeah. So in San Jose, I want to say historically, the poetry scene there has been more of like the older generation, and it has been like kind of, I guess, older and predominantly white. Although the makeup of San Jose, I'd say, is like predominantly like Asian and Latinx. But recently, and it's been really great. There's been this like kind of like, I guess I don't want to say new wave, because I think the poets have always been there, but it's definitely become more prominent, a wave of like younger poets of color. And so there's this super dope cafe in downtown San Jose, just plugging it, but it's called Nirvana Soul. And so they do like open mics. I want to say for poetry specifically, it's either the last Thursday or second to last Thursday of each month, and that's where everyone like kind of comes out, and it's like it's just like a poetry open mic, and it's really nice because now it's like slowly, it's starting to integrate like the community from like, because San Jose State is like located right in downtown San Jose, and that's where a lot of these like young poets who are like super incredible are from. And so there's like kind of that community, and kind of just with my like youth poet laureateship and just the creation of like the Santa Clara County Youth Poet Laureate program. I'm like serving in its inaugural year. We've been really trying to be intentional about also creating like specific youth spaces, because like I said earlier, the space historically has been predominantly more so only like accessible to like adults. So, but we've been really working towards like that, creating a space also specifically like for young people. So yeah, I'm super excited with like the direction the San Jose poetry scene has been going, and also just like how vibrant it like has historically been. So yeah.
1000%, absolutely. So you had mentioned, your youth laureateship, the Santa Clara County's 2021 inaugural. So you're the first youth poet laureate. And the way I was introduced to your work, someone had told me, they're like, "Oh, you have to check out this girl's work from San Jose." She's like the first, she's the inaugural youth poet in Santa Clara, all that good stuff. Like, you need to go check out her stuff. This is like, she's like a phenom and she's so young. She's only 17, 18. And so I'm wondering for you, obviously when I'm reading your bio, you've had so much success. You're the youth poet laureate at 17. You know what I mean? You've written for all these publications. For you, achieving all this kind of success in the poetry world at such a young age, what has that really meant for you? What is that kind of brought to your life? What has that brought to your professional life, like in terms of now where you see your career going? I don't know how you started off with poetry, whether it was just like a hobby with you just writing, but now you've had so much success. What has that success meant to you?
Yeah, I think it definitely has been really crazy and really unexpected, because I started writing poetry in like 8th grade, 7th grade, kind of. I think at that time there was like a lot of like political turmoil in the US, and it was just kind of a way for me to kind of like get out my like teen political angst. And then I started, reading these poems at these open mics in San Jose, and realizing that there are people who actually want to listen to my work or think that my work is good. And that was really cool to me, because I think before it felt like I think I always had, like, I always like wrote for myself, and I still do try to like center like writing for myself, but it was really cool to see that my poetry, like, I think could extend beyond myself. And I think when I was starting out, especially like my freshman year, when I was like, oh, I'm a senior in high school right now, so that's kind of like the chronology. But I think when people started reaching out to me to perform at like different like events or like different rallies, it was always so cool to me after my set or something, when I have people, especially like young people who are like my age, come up to me and be like, "Oh, I really resonated with that poem," or like, "Oh yeah, like I like that message, like I really needed to hear," or something like that. It was just like really cool for me. And I think really, yeah, again, opened my eyes to kind of like what you were saying about like maybe being able to do like poetry as something like professionally in the long run, as opposed to something I just like kind of only did for myself. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I think, and kind of continuing on that vein, I feel like with that like point of like being able to like connect with other people through my work, there's also this like really, like, I feel like super like dope phenomenon of like, I feel like poetry has allowed me, especially I feel like as like a young person, access into like a lot of rooms and spaces that I normally probably wouldn't really have access to. Like, I think a lot of the times, because a lot of what I want to say is like packaged through poetry, whether that's like commentary on like specific like social events or like specific like political beliefs, because like I guess I'm expressing that through poetry a lot of the times too. I think certain audiences, it's like more like digestible, and so maybe normally like these like certain groups wouldn't really want to listen, or like yeah, want to listen to what I like have to say, or like my opinions on certain issues, because I feel like, and I feel like it's a double-edged sword, because I feel like it kind of comes with this idea of like respectability politics, like your like opinions have to be packaged like pretty in order to be like listened to, which I don't think is like a great thing at all, because it's like then it's like not accessible. But I think poetry does like kind of like bridge that gap, I think, especially for young people. So that's also been like a really like interesting, I think, experience. Yeah.
That's it. That's such a fascinating kind of revelation that you've had. You feel like poetry has put you into rooms that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to have access to. What could you
Right.
talk about? What type of spaces do you feel like you've been able to experience now that you felt like you didn't have access to prior to being a poet on this level?
Right. Yeah. I think one experience that always really comes to mind was in 2020. That's like kind of like I think it was in the May time where it was like, the height of the pandemic, and anti-Asian racism and sentiment was like an all-time high. I think what had happened was, there's this politician named Andrew Yang, who was like a presidential candidate for the 2020 election. He had written this op-ed for the Washington Post, basically that was saying that, like, in order for Asian Americans, and he's Asian American himself, which makes this whole thing even crazier. But he had wrote this op-ed. He was like, in order for Asian Americans to not experience hate crimes, we should like show more patriotism and like prove our Americanness, right? And a lot of people who read that, especially the Asian American communities, were like, what? Like, how are you going to tell us that we have to like be even more patriotic just so we deserve like basic respect, right? And I think so basically after reading the op-ed, I was like whoa, what's like going on, right? And so I had written like a poem in response to that. It's called On the Back Porch. And basically the poem kind of like refuted this whole notion of like, we can't just keep waiting for people to like respect us. We need to kind of like demand respect, because like waiting isn't really going to do anything. And I think if I like, and so basically what had happened, so basically what had happened was I read the poem, and it had been like kind of like passed through the like the South Bay area like community, and it was like really cool. But it ended up getting picked up by Stanford University, which had been doing was working on a spoken word / music documentary with the Kronos Quartet, which is this super cool like string quartet that like performs nationally. And they had been working on this documentary, which basically wove together spoken word and music, and was kind of like, it was called Testimony, and it was kind of like a commentary on just like 2020 and just like the recent like social political state of the United States. And so my poem's able to be like incorporated into that and like reach like a national audience. And I just like remember thinking like, I feel like if I wasn't like a young poet and I wasn't able to like articulate my thoughts like about Andrew Yang's op-ed like through a poem, like I don't think my voice would have been able to have like, or like just like my like, I guess like how I felt towards that op-ed definitely would not have been amplified that much, and would not have been able to like reach so many people, like, because at the time I was like 17, and I was like, and I just remember thinking like in a normal, I feel like quote unquote normal circumstance, if I wasn't like a poet, I don't think I would have had access to kind of have my voice be elevated on that sort of national stage against this like nationally known politician. So I think that was definitely one of the examples where I was like, wow, this is like really cool how poetry has given me access to have like my poem and my voice elevated kind of on this like national level. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, phenomenal. Yeah, because that poem that you wrote, like you said, got picked up and it became viral. I mean, it became it became big because, you're going up against, like you said, this national politician. And then it became such a kind of a voice for like these different people during this unfortunate Asian hate movement that was happening during that time, all those things. So it's definitely, I'm then curious for you, do you feel like poetry, what power do you feel like poetry has on our world because of what you've been able to do? I mean, like you said, if you didn't have a poem, you don't feel like you'd be able to kind of go up against that big old machine, all that stuff. What do you feel like poetry really has the effect on our world?
Yeah, so I really like going back to like Tony Cade Bombara's quote, like the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I think I was actually talking to one of my friends about this, like I think last week, but we were talking about how like I think poetry, and I want to say especially spoken word, is so powerful because like I feel like the best like poems that I've listened to, the best poems I've seen performed, like the main thing that is like present in all those poems are like personal stories and like vulnerability, right? And I think when you like kind of compare that to like maybe an article about like a sort of like maybe social event that's happening, or like maybe like a newscast, I think a lot of the times people perceive poetry as like something that's a lot more accessible. I think especially spoken word, because it's something you can just kind of like listen to. So I think, yeah, poetry is definitely, I guess in my opinion, it's like a lot more accessible for people. And since I feel like like poetry is very like contingent on sharing these like personal experiences, and for spoken word, like kind of making you feel from that performance aspect. I think a lot of the times it's a lot easier to galvanize people to like feel a certain way or like care about an issue through spoken word. I think just because there's so much of that like emotion and that vulnerability, and like I feel like poetry, again, it's like you don't have to like wade through like academic language if it's like if it would be in like an article or something like that. Poetry is just like very straightforward, I think, especially spoken word, like in your face. So I think that's definitely that, yeah, that's what I think makes poetry like so powerful to like kind of different movements.
Yeah, I like that a lot. You said to galvanize people. I remember I run like a mentorship group with some younger poets, and I remember telling them this weekend, I was like, there's a line from there's a show back in the day called Def Jam Poetry on HBO. There's a poet, his name was Gemini. I remember what he had this poem called Poetic Bloodlines, and I remember in one of the lines he was just like, your poetry can rally soldiers to war, your poetry can turn girls and boys into women and men. And it's who, like that line still sticks with me to this day after I heard that poem, like literally I think 6 years ago, because it's so powerful, the voice of like the spoken word, just the human voice, what we can do with our voices. Like literally you can change so many, you can influence so many with your words. So I completely love what you have to say. Absolutely. So I would like to kind of go back a little bit. Obviously, seeing with this kind of in such a short amount of time, you've achieved so much. But what really, for you, how did you come into writing? Did you grow up in a household where the arts were encouraged, where your parents were like, hey, yo, go into poetry, you have a knack for it, we support it, we love you doing this? How did you fall into it? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think so. I think growing up, I always really liked to read. So that was one thing. And we did read like a lot of poetry at school, I think elementary school, middle school, but I think none of it really like resonated with me, or I didn't really ever think of like, oh, I want to write like poetry outside of like school assignments. Yeah, I think until seventh or eighth grade, I fell down kind of this like YouTube rabbit hole of like button poetry, just like different slam poetry videos. And I was like, damn, that is so cool. Because I think before I'd stumbled upon like the spoken word, I'd also always perceived poetry as kind of like, this like, I guess like dead thing on a page. I think partially because at school we would only kind of read like like historical like white poetry that I like that'd be like, it'd be great, but like I just couldn't really relate to it, so it just feel more like a historical artifact rather than something that might be like living and breathing like spoken word. But I just remember like because I had always like, when I was younger, I'd always loved like performing like in theater and everything, so I just remember like watching a video and I was like, one, like this is so cool, this poem is so great, and like two, they're like performing this with like so much like spirit and passion, and like three, they're able to like talk about exactly what they care about with like spoken word, just because I feel like spoken word has historically been so like political. And so I think those three aspects made me like just fall in love, because like again, I think at that time I was like really trying to figure out like kind of like, this sounds kind of cheesy, but like my place in the world. And I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out. But I think spoken word was like kind of a good avenue for me to like, okay, let me just like write down my thoughts through this avenue. It lets me like really unabashedly express myself. So yeah, I think it just kind of bloomed from there. And then obviously having that access to such like I think like a political and like just like socially aware like poetry community, that was like a really big part too, because I think if I hadn't ended up like being connected to the San Jose poetry community, I think what I write now would definitely look like a lot different, and like the way I think about the role of the poet and and poetry. So yeah, I'd say like having access to the San Jose, Santa Clara poetry community was like a really big thing too.
Absolutely. Wow. I'm curious too then. No, because you talked about that idea of being a younger person in poetry. But there's even people even younger than you that are attempting to do poetry, that are in poetry. For you, what do you think people can do to get more of our youth children, interested in poetry? And I'm specifically talking, let's say, 18 and under, how can we get them, kids, how can we really get them interested in poetry? What can, like you said, galvanize? How can we get people, those young folks, interested in poetry?
Right. I think one thing, and I think I might be a little bit biased just because I do spoken word, but I'd say like having like also like a balance of like written word and like spoken word in like like different, like I think like school curriculums, English curriculums, just because I think, again, and I feel like maybe this will be like different for like different young people, but I think especially in my community, like I think like I think in high school we started reading like more poets of color also, and just like and watch like some spoken word videos in class. And I think that's when I really saw, because like the school I go to is like predominantly like POC. I think that's when I saw my classmates start to be like, oh wait, I like relate with this poem, this is like really interesting to me. Because I think having that personal connection is the most important part. Being able to see yourself in a poem, or see yourself as potentially being the speaker of a poem, I think is like so powerful. Because yeah, I feel like the first step to like just like writing poetry or being interested in poetry is knowing that, or at least is feeling like as if you have like a space in that community or a space in that narrative. So yeah, I'd say that's the biggest thing. And then also like spoken word, because just going back to that idea of like an emotional connection, I think spoken word is the most powerful, or yeah, is one of the best like conduits to having like an emotional connection. And I think especially for young people, that could be like a really powerful thing too. Yeah.
Absolutely. So for you, when you get up and do your spoken word performances, I've seen some of your videos with your open mics and everything. What is kind of your preparation process? Are you one, do you get major stage fright? Do you get anxiety? What does it look like for you as you prepare to go up and do your spoken word? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I don't think I get too nervous before I perform. I think just because I also do speech and debate. And so it's kind of like that same energy of like going up, to perform. And I think one thing that I found that really helps dissipate like my nerves when I do have nerves is I try to like talk through like my set. So instead of just going from like, and I know like I think like the majority of performance poets do this, and I just try to emulate that, but just like kind of trying to build like a relationship with the audience outside of like the performance of the poems. So then I'd like first like kind of talk to the audience, like just like, hey, like I'm Anouk, and just kind of like I think, yeah, kind of build that relationship, and just like, oh, this is the first poem I'm going to perform. And then I kind of go into performance mode for that poem. And then I kind of step out, like talk about the poem a little bit, transition into the next. I think that way it like, at least in my head, it like humanizes the audience a lot more. So it's just like, I'm just like having a conversation through my poetry. And so it's a lot less stressful, I think, when that happens. But as for like the like pre-performance, I think, yeah, I just like run the poem through my head, and I usually like kind of like, I think I practice a lot, especially if it's like a new poem. I'd say like 3 to 4 days like before, I make sure like I'm completely memorized, I let it sit, and then I'll probably practice like the night before just in case. But yeah, I think that's usually my process. Yeah.
So I love that you said that you do like kind of almost, so you perform your piece and you do like a conversation in between. So you kind of talk to, I do that, I do the same exact thing with my,
Oh, no way.
Yeah, when I do a show, usually I already have a theme set for the show. Let's say if it's just me solo performing, it's just my set completely. I'll have a theme for the show, and I'll select certain poems, and then like I have a story about each poem that's
right, yeah,
that's outside of the spoken word performance piece of it. So yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, no, and then what I love about it is just, it's more than anything, it's when you perform spoken word, you're storytelling. I mean, it's the greatest piece of storytelling someone could ever give. You're just telling stories to your audience. But yo, I love that a lot. I love that a lot that you do that too. So I'm also curious. I mean, geez, EJ, this has just been such a really such a conversation with so much knowledge coming from you. Please tell us, with all these achievements that you have, I'm so intrigued. You are a U.S. delegate to the International Congress of Youth Voices. Tell us, how does one even get involved in that? What does that even look like? What do you do as a Madam Delegate? What do you do?
Yeah, so the International Congress of Youth Voices is this really cool like international like org basically that's basically how they like find delegates, or actually I'll start like they're basically like an organization of like youth writing like workshops and organizations all across the world. And so these like certain orgs that are under ICYV, basically they can nominate their student writers or like people or like young activists like participating in their programs to be like a part of the Congress. And so basically the Congress is something that has been happening annually, but it got staved off because of the pandemic. But I was able to attend the one in 2019 that was happening in like San Juan, Puerto Rico. And it was like a super great experience because basically the Congress like taps young writers from like across the world. And so there was 100, I want to say that year's 150 of us. We were in San Juan, and it was kind of just this, it was really cool because it was like workshop based, but also like deliberation, where we like talk about like our communities, the needs we see in our communities, how we can use like writing, poetry, like youth activism to kind of like overcome like those barriers in our communities. And then we also were able to connect with like a lot of incredible writers and like incredible activists who that the Congress had brought in. And it was a really great experience because it was really cool to be in San Juan, especially during 2019, because we actually were there just like days after they had unseated their mayor in San Juan, because what had happened was there was basically this movement called Renuncia Ricky, where basically the people wanted to like renounce the mayor because of a bunch of like leaked chats about like political like negligence had come out. And so the energy in the city was also very like politically vibrant. There were still protests going on that night, and it was just like really cool to see what like things we were talking about in the Congress and about like our communities, like that was happening in San Juan too. So it was just like a really, really great experience. And yeah, so I got to meet like a lot of other like young people who are also really passionate about writing and using writing as kind of this like vessel for change. Yeah, so it's been like, it has been like a really great experience, and like we're all still like connected all of like the delegates, even though we haven't been able to like meet in person. But yeah, it has been like the Congress has just been a really great and eye-opening experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that sounds phenomenal. Congratulations on that honor. So you talked about a little bit about you met your peers also during this delegation, the International Congress of Youth Voices. How important do you think that is in terms of poets meeting other poets, spoken word artists meeting other spoken word artists? How important do you think that is for poetry and spoken word to stay alive by us all congregating and meeting with each other?
Oh yeah, I think it's so important. I feel like one of the biggest, like we talked about this earlier, but one of the biggest things that keeps like spoken word alive is definitely open mics. And I feel like I don't know if this is like a weird metaphor, but I was like talking to like again one of my friends about this. I'm just like, every time I go to an open mic, like with the community there, it almost feels like a religious experience. Like I don't know what it is, but there's just like this feeling of like shared community in the room. And a lot of the times you go into like the open mic maybe knowing like one other person there, but by the end, you snapped at everyone's poems, you hollered at everyone's poems, and it just feels like the whole community is connected. And I feel like because again, like spoken word just has this quality that really draws you in. Afterwards, there's so many conversations that happen, like, oh, I love your poem and I love like the issue you talked about. And a lot of the times these like conversations will stem off into like either just like friendships, or just like deeper, I think, like conversations about like the issues that the poems are talking about. And I feel like, yeah, I feel like open mics just have been like some of the most like welcoming spaces that I've been in. And as to, I feel like the importance of community for like spoken word poets, like specifically, I think in my experience, I think meeting other young writers especially has been like, I think like really helpful in like kind of like me affirming that like, oh, spoken word is something I definitely want to do, or like I'm, I guess like it just definitely feels a lot, I guess, like less lonely, I guess, because I can't imagine like just like writing poems and performing, but not knowing like other young people who are kind of doing the same thing. Because it's always so fun to hear other people's poems and just
Yeah.
talk to them about like their process as like a writer and everything. So I feel like having that community is like absolutely integral, because like spoken word is like such like a social form of art. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree. A completely social form of art. As much as the writing process you do by yourself, your performance is so integrated in everyone that you speak to. So it's such a
Right.
generative community based thing. So absolutely, I completely agree. You make a friend with a poet, you'll make a poet friend for life. I completely stand by that
Yes.
statement. So I'm curious. This has been also great. For you nowadays, what do you find in your inspiration for writing? What inspires you for your writing in nowadays? What's that looking like for you, your inspirations?
Yeah, I think I get inspired, I think, a lot by like articles I read, especially like I think when I'm on Twitter, I think like my last four poems have like come from just me like scrolling through Twitter, reading different
Mhm.
articles. Because I feel like for me, I know that like a topic, I know I want to write about a topic, or like it'd be a good topic for me to write about whenever I have, I think, like a very strong emotional reaction to something. So like I think an example of a poem that I wrote recently was earlier in June of last year. Hong Kong basically had their last, I think it's their last, yeah, it was their last print newspaper that wasn't like government censored or government owned, shut down by like the CCP. And like for years after basically the British had relinquished control of Hong Kong, the city has been in this like weird, like kind
Yeah.
of struggle to not be like swallowed like by the CCP. But basically that the closing of the Apple Daily, which was that last like newspaper stand, was kind of like a really big deal because it kind of marked, I guess, the beginning, or not even the beginning, but kind of that decline of like free press in Hong Kong. And I remember I was scrolling through my Twitter feed, and then I had saw this video. It was like crazy because they had printed like I think their last issue, they were distributing it in the middle of the night, and there was just someone had taken a video, and basically it was the entire staff of the Apple Daily, and they were on like at the something teenth floor of the building. They were all like waving their phone flashlights like goodbye in like the middle of the night, because they knew that they were going to all like be arrested soon. And it was just like, that's like such powerful like image that was like circulated online that like prompted me to write the poem, which is called like A Portrait of a Thousand Good Nights. But basically, yeah, I think I'm inspired to like write things whenever like I read like a strong article or see kind of like strong like imagery, and I think the majority of poems I write do have to do with like current events. So yeah, a lot of the times that's like sourced from the news. But yeah, that's kind of like my writing process. I'll like read something or like see something that it'll it'll be about like an issue that I really care about, or just like an issue that like I really can't stop thinking about, and then I like kind of translate that to like the page and then like morph it into a poem. Yeah.
Dope, dope, dope. For you, are there any poets that you want to work with?
Oh my God, there's so many. Um, as for like spoken word poets, I think Franny Choi is so cool. Franny Choi and Dinesh Smith, both of them I think are so cool because they're amazing. They like straddle that line of like performance poetry and like page poetry so brilliantly. Like
Mm,
their poem, you can read it, you're like, oh, this is a page poem. Like the line breaks everything, and then you hear them perform it, you're like,
yeah.
shoot, I think it's just like it's crazy. They're like amazing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think them, and then obviously Ocean Vuong is just so incredible.
Yeah.
I just finished On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just so mind-blowing. Yeah. And like for like youth poets, there are so many incredible youth poets. Like Samuel Getachew, who's the 2020 Oakland Youth Poet Laureate. He's absolutely incredible. And there's so many like youth poets in like the Santa Clara community, like Jasmine Kapadia. She's one of my good friends. And I've gotten to work with her before, which is so great. But yeah, I think there are a lot of like young people that I also want to work with too. But yeah, I think those are some of the people that have come to mind off the top of my head.
Absolutely, absolutely. All the folks you had named, I absolutely love and adore, especially Ocean. Yeah, Earth Were Briefly Gorgeous. That's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I love that collection actually. So oh my goodness, this has been so great. So I have one last question for you. The time old, the Poet Speaks podcast question we ask every poet that steps onto our stage. Why do you need to get your words out?
Ooh, yeah. I think my like answer to that question definitely has like evolved from when I started writing. I think when I started writing poetry, I just like I needed to get my words out because it felt like if I didn't, then like again back to that idea of like kind of finding my place in the world. I feel like in order for me to have like felt like I was making like an imprint on the world, I just needed my voice to kind of be out there in the void, because I think that's just where I was at like in 7th or 8th grade. Like I just wanted like I guess my voice to be heard in like some capacity as a young person. And I think like as like I've like progressed, I guess, age-wise through poetry, I think that has like been a thing, I guess, that's kind of like kept me driving. Like kind of I feel like my identity is like rooted in a way in my words, but also I feel like there's just so many issues and just so many like yeah, I think there's like so many different like issues, whether that be like local community issues or national issues, that a lot of the times I think get kind of like lost in the media cycle or aren't like covered as much, just because like I feel like certain communities like nationally are definitely like undercovered. And I feel like with like poetry, and like not just with my poetry but with like all young poets of color especially, I think it's so important for our words to get out there, because if we don't tell our stories, like who else will, right? And I think yeah, that's something that I've been like learning like a lot of the times. And again, I've like had this conversation before with like other young poets. I've thought like, oh, do I like write this poem or not? Like this poem might be controversial or it might be like very intensely personal, but the conclusion that I've always like come back to is like, again, if I'm not going to tell this story, like I can't say for certain if this story will ever be told, right? Or like if the people that or like if people will ever hear like the story. So I think I think that's kind of like where I'm at now. Just one, like I guess again, like my identity is like rooted in my words, but also just I feel like just like for all like young poets, it's so important for us to get our words out there, because like if like we don't, then a lot of the times our stories won't be told. Yeah.
Absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful answer. Absolutely. Everyone, please, young, old alike, please, everyone, get your words out to tell your story. Thank you so much, Anouk. Well, this has been such an amazing, amazing podcast. Please tell us before we end the show today, what is 2022 looking like for you and beyond for your spoken word poetry, all the positions you're holding as the Inaugural Youth Poet Laureate? What is it looking like for you? And also tell us, where can we find all your stuff, your socials, your website, all that good stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I can start off with my like social media and stuff, just so I don't forget. My Instagram is at uh.nouk. And then my website, which has my poetry and journalism, is anoukyeh.com. And so that's ANOUKYEH.com. And so those are kind of my two like places where you can find my poetry. And then as for 2022, so this is like a super exciting year, because I'm working with so this is kind of the second half of my Youth Poet Laureate year. And so I'm wrapping up my Youth Poet Laureate project, which is going to culminate in like an anthology that'll be coming out in late 2022, which is super exciting. I don't know how much I can say about it yet, but yeah, so that's happening. And then also I'll be starting college in the fall. And I'm really hoping to join my university's slam team. And so I'm like super excited about that because Yale has like a really vibrant spoken word community. So I'm really hoping that I definitely get to grow like as a writer and as a poet in like that like collegiate competitive environment. But yeah, so I think I'm just like really excited to see what happens in 2022. And I hope to continue going as like a writer and a poet. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, like the direction of 2022. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we wish you all the best on what I know will be an amazing rest of your year, an amazing career as a spoken word poet, spoken word artist, and whatever you choose to do in the future. So thank you so much, Anouk, for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Absolutely. So everyone, please check out all the Anouk's amazing work. It'll be in the YouTube comment section, the description box below in the YouTube section, the YouTube video of the Poet Speaks podcast for this episode. So everyone, please check out all the Anouk's amazing work. And again, please check out the Poet Speaks podcast. Like, share, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment, share it with your friends, everybody that you know. Again, we are the #1 spoken word poetry podcast in the world. Please don't forget. All right, everyone, this is the Poet Speaks podcast. We will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.